Pseudopod is extruded into this universe from a dimension of purest fear. It's beautiful in its own alien way, but what's to come will unsettle you. Pseudopod, episode 633, February 1st, 2019. This week's story, Hippocampus, by Adam L.G. Neville.
Lead me to a lonely place, dressed for opening time. Show me bleeding where my love burns you, breathing fire.
Hello everyone, welcome to Pseudopod, the weekly horror podcast. I'm Alistair, your host, and this week's story comes to us from Adam L.G. Neville. Hippocampus was first published in Terror Tales of the Sea, edited by Paul Finch. The story can also be found in Hasty for the Dark, Selected Horrors. These range from the speculative to supernatural, encompass the infernal and the occult, and include stories inspired by H.P. Lovecraft, Robert Aikman, and Ramsey Campbell. Hasty for the Dark is the second short story collection from Adam L.G. Neville. The author's best horror stories from 2009 to 2015 are collected here for the first time, and we'll have links to where you can pick up the collection in the show notes. Adam does really good stuff, and as you'll see from this story, he knows horror inside and out. Your reader for this week is Peter Bishop, who comes to us courtesy of Christopher C. Payne at Journalstone. Journalstone is a small press publishing company focusing on horror, science fiction, and fantasy in the adult and YA markets. So, without further ado, we have a story for you, and both Adam and Peter promise you it's true.
The living that time hates.
Hippocampus. Walls of water as slow as lava, black as coal, push the freighter up mountainsides, over frothing peaks, and into plunging descents. Across vast rolling waves the vessel plows, ungainly, conjuring galaxies of bubbles around its passage and in its wake. Temporary cosmoses appear for moments in the immensity of onyx water, forged, then sucked beneath the hull, or are sacrificed, fizzing, to the freezing night air. On and on the great steel vessel wallops, staggering up as if from soiled knees before another nauseating drop into a trough. There is no rest, and the ship has no choice but to brace itself, dizzy and near breathless, over and over again for the next great wave. On board, lighted portholes and square windows offer tiny yellow shapes of reassurance amidst the lightless, roaring ocean that stretches all around and so far below. Reminiscent of a warm home offering a welcome on a winter night, the cabin lights are complemented by the two metal doorways that gape in the rear house of the superstructure. Their spilled light glosses portions of the slick deck. All of the surfaces on board are steel, painted white. Riveted and welded tight to the deck and each other, the metal cubes of the superstructure are necklaced by yellow rails, intended for those who must slip and reel about the flooded decks. Here and there, white ladders rise, and seem by their very presence to evoke a clang, clang, clang sound of feet going up and down quickly. Small lifeboat cases resembling plastic barrels are fixed at the sides of the upper deck, all of them intact and locked shut. The occasional crane peers out to sea with inappropriate nonchalance, or with the expectation of a purpose that has not come. Up above the distant bridge, from which no faces peer out, the aerials, satellite dishes and navigation masts appear to totter in panic, or to whip their poles, wires and struts from side to side, as if engaged in a frantic search of the ever-changing landscape of water below. The vast steel door of the hold's first hatch is raised and still attached to the crane by chains. This large square section of the hull is filled with white sacks stacked upon each other in tight columns. Those at the top of the pile are now dark and sopping with rain and seawater. In the centre, scores of the heavy bags have been removed from all around a scuffed and dented metal container, painted black. Until its discovery, the container appears to have been deliberately hidden among the tiers of fibre sacks. One side of the double doors at the front of the old container has been jammed open. Somewhere on deck, a small brass bell clangs a lonesome, undirected cry, a mere nod to tradition, as there are speakers thrusting their silent horns from the metallic walls and masts. But though in better weather the tiny, urgent sound of the bell is occasionally answered by a gull, tonight it is answered by nothing save the black, shrieking chaos of the wind and the water it thrashes. There is a lane between the freighter's rear house and the crane above the open hatch. A passage unpeopled, wet, and lit by 6 lights in metal cages. Muster Station Lifeboat 2 is stenciled on the wall in red lettering. Passing through the lane, the noise of the engine intake fans fills the space hotly. Diesel heat creates the impression of being close to moving machine parts, as if functioning as evidence of the ship's purpose and life, and rumbling across every surface like electric current in each part of the vessel, the continuous vibration of the engine's exhaust thrums. Above the open hatch and beside the lifeboat assembly point, from a door left gaping in the rear house, drifts a thick warmth, heat that waits to wrap itself round wind-seared cheeks in the way a summer's sun cups faces. Once across the metal threshold, the engine fibrillations deepen as if muted underground. The bronchial roar of the intake fans dulls. Inside, the salty spittle scour of the night air and the noxious mechanical odours are replaced by the scent of old emulsion and the stale chemicals of exhausted air fresheners. A staircase leads down. But as above, so below. As on deck, no one walks here. All is still, brightly lit and faintly rumbling with the bass strumming of the exhaust. The communal area appears calm and indifferent to the intense black energies of the hurricane outside. A long, narrow corridor runs through the rear house. Square lenses in the steel ceiling illuminate the plain passageway. The floor is covered in linoleum. The walls are matte yellow. The doors to the cabins trimmed with wood laminate. Halfway down, 2 opposing doors hang open before lit rooms. The first room was intended for recreation to ease a crew's passage on a long voyage, but no one seeks leisure now. Coloured balls roll across the pool table from the swell that shimmies the ship. 2 cues lie amongst the balls and move back and forth like flotsam on the tide. At rest upon the table tennis table are 2 worn paddles. The television screen remains as empty and black as the rain-thrashed canopy of sky above the freighter. One of the brown leatherette sofas is split in 2 places, and masking tape suppresses the spongy eruptions of cushion entrails. Across the corridor, a long bank of washing machines and dryers stand idle in the crew's laundry room. Strung across the ceiling are washing line cords that loop like skipping ropes from the weight of the clothing that is pegged in rows. Jeans, socks, shirts, towels. One basket has been dropped upon the floor and has spilled its contents towards the door. Up one flight of stairs, an empty bridge. Monitor screens glow green, consoles flicker. One stool lies on its side and the cushioned seat rolls back and forth. A solitary handgun skitters this way and that across the floor. The weapon adds a touch of tension to the otherwise tranquil area of operations, as if a drama has recently passed, been interrupted, or even abandoned. Back down below, deeper inside the ship and further along the crew's communal corridor, the stainless steel galley glimmers dully in white light. A skein of steam clouds over the work surfaces and condenses on the ceiling above the oven. 2 large unwashed pots have boiled dry upon cooker rings glowing red. From around the oven door, wisps of black smoke puff. Inside the oven, a tray of potatoes has baked to carbon, and they now resemble the fossils of reptile guano. Around the great chopping board on the central table, lies a scattering of chopped vegetables cast wide by the freighter's lurches and twists. The ceiling above the workstation is railed with steel and festooned with swaying kitchenware. 6 large steaks, encrusted with crushed salt, await the abandoned spatula and the griddle that hisses black and dry. A large refrigerator door, resembling the gate of a bank vault, hangs open to reveal crowded shelves that gleam in ivory light. There is a metal sink the size of a bathtub. Inside it lies a human scalp. Lopped roughly from the top of a head and left to drain beside the plug hole, the gingery mess looks absurdly artificial. But the clod of hair was once plumbed into a circulatory system because the hair is matted dark and wet at the fringes and surrounded by flecks of ochre. The implement that removed the scalp lies upon the draining board. A long knife, the edge serrated for sawing. Above the adjacent workstation, at the end of the rack that holds the cook's knives, several items are missing. Maybe this dripping thing of hair was brought to the sink area from somewhere outside the galley, carried along the corridor and up the flight of stairs that leads from the crew's quarters. Red droplets as round as rose petals make a trail into the first cabin on a corridor identical to the communal passage on the deck above. The door to this cabin is open. Inside, the trail of scarlet is immediately lost within the borders of a far bigger stain. A fluorescent jacket and cap hang upon a peg just inside the door of the cabin. All is neat and orderly upon the bookshelf, which holds volumes that brush the low white ceiling. A chest of drawers doubles as a desk. The articles on the desktop are held down by a glass paperweight and overlooked by silver-framed photographs of wives and children at the rear of the desk. On top of the wardrobe, life jackets and hard hats are stowed. 2 twin beds, arranged close together, are unoccupied. Beneath the bed frames, orange survival suits remain neatly folded and tightly packed. The bedclothes of the berth on the right-hand side are tidy and undisturbed, but the white top sheet and the yellow blanket of the adjacent berth droop to the linoleum floor like idle sails. There is a suggestion that the occupant departed this bed hurriedly or was removed swiftly. The bed linen has been yanked from the bed and only remains tucked under the mattress in one corner. A body was also ruined in that bed. The middle of the mattress is blood-sodden, and the cabin reeks of salt and rust. Crimson gouts from a bedside frenzy have flecked and speckled the wall beside the bed and part of the ceiling. Attached to the room is a small and sweet bathroom that just manages to hold a shower cubicle and a small steel sink. The bathroom is pristine. The taps, showerhead, and towel rail sparkle. All that is amiss is a single slip-on shoe, dropped on the floor just in front of the sink. A foot remains inside the shoe, with part of a hairy ankle extending from the uppers. From the cabin, more than a trail of droplets can be followed further down the passage and towards the neighbouring berths. A long, intermittent streak of red has been smeared along the length of the corridor, past the 4 doors that all hang open and drift back and forth as the ship lists. From each of these cabins, other collections have been made. What occupants once existed in the crew's quarters appear to have arisen from their beds before stumbling towards the door, as if hearing some cause for alarm nearby. Just before the doorway of the berths, they seem to have met with their ends quickly. Wide, lumpy puddles, like spilled stew made with red wine, are splashed across the floors. One crew member sought refuge inside the shower cubicle of the last cabin, because the bathroom door is broken open and the basin of the shower is drenched nearly black from a sudden and conclusive emptying. Livestock, hung above the cement of a slaughterhouse and emptied from the throat, leave similar stains. To the left, at the end of the passage, the open door of the captain's cabin is visible. Inside, the sofa beside the coffee table and the 2 easy chairs sit expectant but empty. The office furniture and shelves reveal no disarray, but set upon the broad desk are 3 long wooden crates. The tops have been levered off, and the packing straw that was once inside is now littered about the table's surface and the carpeted floor. Mingling with the straw is a plethora of dried flower petals. Upon a tablecloth spread on the floor before the captain's desk, 2 small forms have been laid out. They lie side by side. They are the size of 5-year-old children and blackened by age, not unlike the preserved forms of ancient peoples, protected behind glass in museums of antiquities. They appear to be shriveled and contorted. Vestiges of a fibrous binding have fused with their petrified flesh and obscured their arms, if they have such limbs. The two small figures are primarily distinguished by the irregular shape and silhouette of their skulls. Their heads appear oversized, and the swollenness of the crania contributes to the leathery ghastliness of their grimacing faces. The rear of each head is fanned by an incomplete mane of spikes, while the front of each head elongates and protrudes into a snout. The desiccated figures have had their lower limbs bound tightly together to create a suggestion of long and curling tails. Inside the second crate lies a large black stone, crudely hollowed out in the middle. The dull and chipped appearance of the block also suggests great age. A modern addition has been made, or offered, to the hollow within the stone. A single human foot. The shoe around the disarticulated extremity matches the footwear inside the shower cubicle of the crew member's cabin. The contents of the third crate have barely been disturbed. In there lie several artifacts that resemble jagged flints, or the surviving blades of old weapons or knives of which the handles are missing. The implements are hand-forged from a stone as black as the basin that has become a receptacle for a human foot. Pictures of a ship and framed maps have been removed from the widest wall, and upon this wall a marker pen has been used to depict the outlines of two snouted or trumpeting figures that are attached to what appear to be long entwined tails. The imagery is crude and childlike, but the silhouettes are similar to the embalmed remains laid out upon the tablecloth. Below the two figures are imprecise stick-like figures that appear to cavort in emulation of the much larger and snouted characters. Set atop some kind of uneven pyramid shape, another group of humans have been excitedly and messily drawn with spikes protruding from their heads or headdresses. Between the crowded forms, another, plainer figure has been held aloft and bleeds from a torso into a waiting receptacle. Detail has been included to indicate that the sacrificed figure's feet have been removed and its legs bound. The mess of human leavings that led here departs from the captain's cabin and rises up a staircase to the deck above and into an unlit canteen. Light falls into this room from the corridor, and in the half-light, two long tables and one smaller table for the officers are revealed. Upon the two larger crew tables, long reddish shapes lie glistening. Some 12 bodies dwindling into darkness as they stretch away from the door. As if they have been unzipped across the front, what was once inside each of the men has now been gathered and piled upon chairs where the same men once sat and ate. Their feet, some bare, some still inside shoes, have been amputated and are set in a messy pile at the head of the two tables. The far end of the cafeteria is barely touched by the residual light. Presented to no living audience, perversely and inappropriately, and yet in a grimy touching fashion, two misshapen shadows flicker and leap upon the dim wall as if in joyous reunion. They wheel about each other ferociously, but not without grace. They are attached, it seems, by two long, spiny tails. Back outside and on deck, it can be seen that the ship continues to meander, dazed with desolation and weariness, perhaps punch-drunk from the shock of what has occurred below deck. The bow momentarily rises up the small hillside of a wave and, just once, almost expectantly, looks towards the distant harbour to which the vessel has slowly drifted all night since changing its course. On shore, and across the surrounding basin of treeless land, the lights of a small harbour town are white pinpricks, desperate to be counted in this black storm. Here and there, the harbour lights define the uneven silhouettes of small buildings, suggesting stone facades in which glass shimmers to form an unwitting beacon for what exists out here upon these waves. Oblivious to anything but its own lurching and clanking, the ship rolls on the swell, inexorably drifting on the current that picked up its steel bulk the day before and now slowly propels the hull, though perhaps not as purposefully as first appeared, towards the shore. At the prow, having first bound himself tight to the railing with a rope, a solitary and unclothed figure nods a bowed head towards the land. The pale flesh of the rotund torso is whipped and occasionally drenched by sea spray, but still bears the ruddy impressions of bestial deeds that were both boisterous and thorough. From navel to sternum, the curious figurehead is blackly open, or has been opened, to the elements. The implement used to carve such crude entrances to the heart is long gone, perhaps dropped from stained and curling fingers into the obsidian whirling and crashing of the monumental ocean far below. As if to emulate a king, where the scalp has been carved away, a crude series of spikes, fashioned from nails, have been hammered into a pattern resembling a spine or fin across the top of the dead man's skull. Both of his feet are missing, and his legs have been bound with twine into a single gruesome tail.
Lead me to a lonely place, dressed for opening time.
Here's what Adam had to say about the story. I was intrigued by the idea of producing a horror story without characters, a relationship between the reader and an anonymous narrator, with the latter mimicking a roving camera. This roving point of view was, in effect, showing the reader a form of found footage of a place in which something terrible had happened. All that was left for the reader was the aftermath and the evidence, the horrors. The reader becomes a witness at a crime scene. The horrors occurred before the story began. This creates a story that only the reader can piece together within their imagination, so, instead of using characters as a vicarious medium, I would just show the reader the raw footage with no middle ground. I found this form could not sustain a story much beyond 2,000 words, and I chose for my subject a vast but derelict container ship. From our local shores and coastal paths, I watched these leviathans cross the horizon all the time on their way to Plymouth. Despite their size, they have small crew complements. As a location for a horror story, and in my process of getting the sea and coast deeper within my imagination, a container ship was just the ticket. I know exactly how he feels. One of my earliest memories is going out to Fort Island, smaller island next to the Isle of Man, with a fort and a bridge, for a picnic. About 10 minutes into the usual Manx summer, massive torrential winds, bright sunshine, we noticed a submarine had surfaced a couple of miles out. A nuclear one. Nearby, the ferries that kept goods and people moving to and from the island plied their trudging trade, and further out, the gas rigs just over the horizon acted as signposts telling you there was only a couple of hours of boat to sit through. The ocean's never quiet, even when the ocean is the tiny strip of water that is the Irish Sea. But what really got me that day and everyone that followed was the other side of that coin, the realization that I lived on a tiny island community, and thus was basically safe from zombies, combined with the realization that literally everything else was over the horizon. I remember watching friends plot a concert trip that actually, truly involved planes, trains, and automobiles. I remember sitting on the floor of the Manx ferry on a 6-hour red-eye crossing from midnight to 6 a.m. I remember a crossing in winds so strong you could hear the slap as the ferry's bow landed back in the water over and over again, interspersed only with the latest round of vomiting. All normal, all mundane, all quiet personal odysseys that had to be carried out to get to things that were happening. There's a sign on the Aran Islands off the coast of Ireland that shows how many thousands of miles away everything else is. When I saw that for the first time, I laughed, and I felt it in my chest at the same time. But the flip side to that need to leave is the reassurance of knowing what you're leaving is still there. I graduated in a class of 300. The amount of us still on the mainland is in single digits. A friend of mine likes to joke about how soon I'll need to return so they can kill me and choose a new king. Oddly enough, I'm in no hurry to go back. But I do love it, at least in part, because I'm not there. But I know it is. which is why this story hits me where I live, or perhaps used to live. Horrifying death powering down onto a small coastal community. The ship burying itself Demeter style in the shore and lacking even the courtesy of something bounding off into the darkness. No, because that gives you some reasonable doubt. That gives you something with a face. Something you can fight. It might just be a poor monkey, like the one rumoured to have been hung as a French spy in Hartlepool during the Napoleonic era. It might be a vast supernatural black dog. Regardless, it's something with agency, something that can be opposed. What Adam describes here is nothing so comforting. A malicious, destructive force that exists to destroy solely because it can. Something unprecedented, something horrific, something creative, something that takes joy in its work. Out in the fog and slowly coming into focus. That's powerful, elemental stuff, and this story will stay with me for a long time. Outstanding work, both Adam and Peter. We rely on you to pay our authors and cover our server costs, and basically pretty much everything else. There are 3 ways you can do that. The one which doesn't involve any money is really simple. Go to iTunes or Google or Stitcher or whatever your podcatcher is and leave a review. That will raise our profile, it will bring more people to the show, and it will get us more attention, and it becomes a virtuous circle. Alternatively, if you like this episode, tweet about it, link to it, write a blog post about it. Do you have a podcast yourself? Could you use guests? Get in touch, we'd love to be on. Now, if you're feeling flush for cash, there are 2 other ways you can help. One is by subscribing through PayPal. Go to pseudopod.org, click on Feed the Pod, donate or subscribe. Donate as much as you would like. Subscribe starts at $5 a month and gets you access to premium content. That's brilliant. And if you can rather do that over at Patreon, also great. Starts at $5 a month. There are a couple of other levels on there. And again, you get access to the premium content bucket. However you can help, please do. Because we are entirely donation funded. And that's all on you. And it never ceases to amaze any of us that you enable us to do this wonderful job so well. So thank you all. Thanks once again to Adam and Peter, and of course to Marty Perrett, our stalwart audio producer for both this week and next week. And what do we have in store for you next week? Well, we have another Flash on the Borderlands for you, one with some truly horrifying Roman numerals attached to it. So I'm just going to go with the subtitle, which is The Accursed and the Monstrous. Then, as now, we will be a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and released under a Creative Commons, Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. And we'll leave you with this quote from Soul Cages by Sting. Where is the fisherman? Where is the goat? Where is the keeper in his carrion coat, eclipse on the moon when the dark bird flies? Where is the child with his father's eyes? We'll see you next week, folks. Until then, don't go near any strange ships.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.